Our next topic is pollination. Pollination means transfer of pollen grains from anther of stamen to the stigma of carpel. There are two types of pollination: self-pollination and cross-pollination. In self-pollination, single plant or plant of same species are involved. When pollen grains are transferred from one flower of a plant to another flower of the same plant, it is called self-pollination. Or if pollen grains are transferred from the flower of one plant to the flower of another plant of the same species, then it is also called self-pollination. Self-pollination doesn't require the transfer agents. The cross-pollination involves the transfer of the pollen grain from one plant to another plant of the same species. From one plant of one species and to another plant of another species, when pollination is done, it is called cross-pollination. When pollen grains move from the flower of one plant toward the flower of another plant, which is not related in its species to the first plant, then it is called cross-pollination. Cross-pollination uses transfer agencies like wind and insects, also man. And depending upon which agency or agent is being used by cross-pollination, there are two types of the flowers: wind-pollinated flowers and insect-pollinated flowers, which are different in the form and structure from each other. Insect-pollinated flowers are different in structure and shape as compared to wind-pollinated flowers. Insect-pollinated flowers are big, in size, and wind-pollinated flowers are small in size. This is the one difference between insect-pollinated flowers and wind-pollinated flowers. The second difference is the insect-pollinated flowers face upwards. These flowers face upwards because they have the need to support the insects which sit on them. That is why they face to the upward. While wind-pollinated flowers face down, or you may say they hang down, so that they can be easily shook with wind, with passing the air. and their pollen grains be spread. The second difference is this, and the third difference between insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers is that insect pollinated flowers have their stamen inside petals, means their stamen is well protected, whereas the stamens in wind pollinated flowers come outside of the petals. For the air to make the stamens shake and let the pollen grain spread. The other difference is that the stigma of insect pollinated flowers is pin-headed and unbranched, whereas the stigma of wind pollinated flowers is feathery and branched. For incoming pollen grain through air to catch. The other difference between insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers is that insect pollinated flowers are nectariferous, means insect pollinated flowers contain nectar, whereas the wind pollinated flowers produce no nectar. Actually, insects are attracted towards those flowers which are having nectar. They need nectar as their food, and to attract the insects and make them to associate the nectar with their flowers, another difference between insect pollinated flower and wind pollinated flower arises. That is, insect pollinated flowers are brightly colored, they are beautiful, and wind pollinated flowers are dull in color, or they are colorless, because they don't have any need to attract the insects. The plants which produce the flowers which pollinate by insects are many. The example is rose, sunflower, wallflower, etc. And wind pollinated flowers are also not less common. Many type of grasses produce wind pollinated flowers.